Well, everybody, Andy here again, day 44, and I'll put the figures down below. Yesterday, once again, a fairly high figure, which I think is fairly consistent at the moment, 649. But the total deaths now have broken the 30,000 barrier, 30,076. And as you can imagine, there's lots of talk about all of that sort of stuff and how that compares. And I mean, that's another one of those milestones, isn't it? But don't really want to dwell on that. I want to talk about other stuff today. I mean, I think, and the book, like, I finished this book yesterday, the lockdown book. I mentioned it the other day. Very good, actually. Very readable. Quite scary. As I said, it's based around London in a very similar situation. I told the story the other week about how it was written and then rejected because it was not realistic, and now it is realistic. Although that particular book is the pandemic in that it's an H5N1 bird flu type virus, which we're not a million miles away with COVID-19, but it's the death rate is a lot higher. So, but it's still scary stuff, and it does make you think, and it's well worth a read if you can put up with something like that at this particular time. But one of the things I can put up with, because I've mentioned this the other day about all the things that you can do online and not learning. I mean, some people have got an aversion to sort of learning. I don't need to have to do that, and it's nice to do nothing and all that, which I totally agree with. But with some of these things that are on at the moment, like Julie's found some art classes. Well, I suppose that is learning, but it's a form of relaxation, what she calls feeding your soul, as I mentioned the other day. I think she found them on Instagram. So she's been doing this, following all these people who are giving out sort of virtual classes, and it's brilliant. You've got all these artists sharing their secrets, sharing the way that they do things, and even some of them, because of the nature of where they are at the moment, they're recording these now. They're contemporary. They're in their houses, and some of the materials that they would normally be using are in their studios, which they can't go to. So they're having to adapt themselves to use different materials in their houses and things that come to hand, which is brilliant. It's a great way of doing it. But one of the artists on there is Quentin Blake, who you may remember is very distinctive art, and he's most well known, I suppose, for the Roald Dahl books, the illustrations that he's done for the Roald Dahl books. Well, he actually lives in Hastings. He's got a house in Hastings, in the Old Town, and he's a great supporter of the gallery here. It used to be called the Jerwood Gallery. It's now called the Hastings Contemporary, and they're actually doing. They were planning an exhibition by Quentin Blake with some brand new material from him, a body of work that he's been doing, but they're putting that online, and that goes online tonight, so that you've got a virtual gallery that you can go to. They're hoping to do it in real, like IRL as they used to call it, in real life, in September or something, hopefully, when people can actually physically go to see some of the paintings. But they're putting a lot of them online, and it's quite an interesting story actually, because it's called We Live in Worrying Times, and he'd already started planning this and talking about the way that the world is. It's to do with sort of disparate people and people suffering in different parts of the world, but it all came to the fore and all sort of became contemporary, I suppose, with the way that things have gone now. And there's one particular piece of work in there, I think it's called The Taxi Driver. And great story about it, that Quentin Blake had a taxi from his home to take him, I don't know where he was going, and the taxi driver picked him up, and Quentin Blake sat in the back of the taxi. And then the taxi driver got in and started saying to him, "Look," he said, "you remember that piece of work, Guernica? Picasso's famous piece of work about Guernica, the town in the Basque Country of Spain during the Spanish Civil War, which was bombed." And he said, "We need a Guernica for the modern age." This is before this has happened, COVID-19. "We need a Guernica for the modern age to say what's going on now." And he said, "And you're the man to do it." And Big Blake said, "Oh, okay, I'll see what I can do." So that's where all of that has come from. So that looks like something to be really interesting, actually. And he's done this huge a portrait on the wall, a la Guernica as well. And so it'd be interesting to see that, and that's going to be done virtually. And so there's so many other things that I've been listening to, actually. Is a load of videos called Word. It's actually Word in Your Attic, but it's the guys who did Word in Your Ear. I'll put the links down below. David Hepworth, who I mentioned before about his music books, and Mark Ellen, who've run several magazines in the past. Word magazine, which is where this all comes from. They started Q magazine. They used to do Smash Hits magazine and Mojo magazine. Loads of different music magazines. So the guys know what they're talking about. But they're just doing these little Zoom videos from their attics. David Hepworth sitting there. I've got all these books behind me. He's got rows and rows of albums, thousands of albums, and just talking to people, getting journalists, artists, musicians, people from right across the sort of spectrum, but who have a musical interest, just talking about their sort of stuff. And for me, for someone who's interested in music, it's fascinating. Great bit of fun there, and it's a bit of a show and tell. People are showing the sort of doing like I'm doing the books and records and things that I've done before. So it's very entertaining for me, actually. So if you're into music, because they talk about music from right across the board, but I suppose it's mainly slightly older, sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, that sort of era. But some of the people I have on are very entertaining as well, and it's interesting to peek into their rooms, but also to hear their own thoughts and also what they're doing in these strange times as well. One other quick one I will mention was the band I know very well locally, Kid Capici, from Hastings. They've had to stop like every other band has done, but what they've done is they started their own little podcast. They're called the Lockdown Podcast, so I'll put a link to that down there. That's quite interesting what they're doing. They were talking to another fellow musician yesterday about how it's affecting all of them, and this particular musician in a well-known band has had to go out and get a job as a delivery driver. That's the nature of the beast, and they just don't know where they're going to be in the future. But one other quick thing I will mention, because there's loads of this stuff out there. You can get out there and find stuff. Julie's sitting over there and planning a weekend of National Theatre productions, things like that. Never had so much culture in our life, I don't think. And so there is some benefits from these lockdowns. You've got the chance to maybe rediscover those things, whether it be drawing, whether it be music, because I'm thinking I'm going to go and read more about music. Yes, more about music, and delve into that as well. It rekindles some of those things that maybe you've left for quite some time. But one last thing, my friend Andy, who I sort of used to work with years ago, reconnected with last year through Hastings Rock Radio. He started listening. I'll put a link down there as well for that. So I've been tied up with that, but he contacted me the other day, and we have a shared love of music. That's what we used to talk about when we were at work, and we should have been doing other things. But he sends me little video CDs and little things like that. And he sent me this the other day. He said, "I've got something for you, Andy. I'm going to send it to you." And it's this. It's a Lemmy garden gnome. How about that, eh? And I was going to put it, you can see this up here. This is an Infanta. It's a piece of pottery that we bought in Seville. And I was going to, and Julie said, don't you dare put him next to next to the Infanta, because knowing what Lemmy was like, who knows what that's going to be. Isn't that great? That's brilliant, isn't it? So thanks very much to Andy. That's going to go up with the music books over there, I think, well away from any of the female characters on here. So hopefully you're finding something to do. Let me know if you are, because follow those links, have a look. You might not like them, but there's a lot out there to keep us going in these strange times. Yes, we've been told that the lockdown might be easing in some ways, but it's not going to change that much for some time to come yet. And lots of people are talking about having to write off 2020 in an entertainment way because of the nature of gigs, pubs, venues, theatres, galleries, all that type of thing. It's going to be very hard to get that up and running. But anyway, that's a subject, because we'll wait and see what Boris and his cohorts tell us what we can or what we can't do, because they are going to tell us something now after what I said yesterday. Anyway, get out there, have a look at all these things. Keep yourself, keep your mind, keep going, drift away into something else for a while while you're at home. So stay at home, stay strong, stay safe, and hopefully I'll speak to you tomorrow. Goodbye.